The movie begins by showing Pat Solitano Jr., a man who has been diagnosed with a mental health condition. After 8 months of treatment at a mental health facility, he is finally being released and picked up by his mother, Dolores Solitano. However, Pat's freedom is not without its restrictions. He is on parole and is not allowed to go near his old school or house. Additionally, he is prohibited from having any contact with his ex-wife, Nikki Solitano, and is under strict surveillance by the police. He must also attend regular therapy sessions and take medication prescribed by his doctors. As Pat and his mother are about to leave the hospital, they run into Pat's friend, Danny McDaniel. Danny asks for a ride home, and Dolores agrees without any suspicion. However, during the ride, the hospital calls Dolores to inform her that Danny is not clear to leave yet. Dolores turns the car around and takes Danny back to the hospital before finally going home with Pat. Upon arriving home, Pat is greeted by his father, Patrizio Solitano Sr., who is overjoyed to see his son back. Patrizio Sr. is a football gambler and has always believed that Pat brings him good luck. He used to take Pat to watch football games with him, but Pat does not believe in such superstitions. Despite his father's well-intentioned advice, Pat is still fixated on his ex-wife, Nikki. Patrizio Sr. urges Pat to move on and forget about Nikki, but Pat has a new outlook on the tragedy he has experienced. He believes that every negative situation has a positive side, which he calls Excelsior. The next day, Pat begins to engage in sports and read books as a way to cope with his trauma, as he is not comfortable taking the medications prescribed by the hospital. He visits his psychiatrist, but as he is about to go in for his appointment, he is suddenly overcome with emotion upon hearing his wedding song playing in the waiting room. Pat becomes unstable, causing a commotion. Fortunately, his psychiatrist, Dr. Cliff, comes out of his office to calm him down and invites him into his office. Once there, Pat shares with Dr. Cliff his emotional response to hearing the song and also recounts the incident that led to his wife cheating on him. Pat recounts to Dr. Cliff the traumatic incident that led to him being institutionalized. He explains that when he first returned home, he found clothes scattered throughout the house. As he followed the trail of clothes, he discovered his wife's underwear and saw her in the shower. He thought she was trying to seduce him, but instead, he found her in the act with another man. In a fit of rage, Pat killed the man. He also admits to Dr. Cliff that he falsely accused his wife of having an affair with a coworker at the high school where he worked. Dr. Cliff concludes that these events were a result of Pat's bipolar disorder. The following day, Pat goes for a jog but instead finds himself at the high school where he used to work as a history teacher. He runs into a teacher named Ms. Adam and inquires about Nikki's whereabouts, but Ms. Adam becomes flustered and avoids answering his questions. After leaving the school, Pat resumes his jog and runs into an old friend named Ronnie. Ronnie is thrilled to see Pat and invites him to dinner at his house. Initially, Pat declines, as he assumes that Ronnie's wife, Veronica, doesn't like him. However, Veronica is not at home and agrees to the dinner invitation, so Pat accepts. At dinner, Pat meets Tiffany, Veronica's younger sister and a young widow who is struggling with depression following the death of her husband. Tiffany appears uncomfortable and wants to leave early. She asked Pat to take her home. When Pat escorts Tiffany home, she surprises him by inviting him to have sex with her. Pat immediately declines, saying that he is still married and is focused on getting back with his wife, Nikki. Nevertheless, Pat finds himself thinking about Tiffany and unable to sleep. He starts searching for his wedding video but can't find it, causing him to become angry and start yelling, waking up all his neighbors. His mother, Dolores, comes in to try to calm him down, but in his agitated state, he accidentally hits her and his father becomes angry and beats him. A police officer named Kiag arrives at the scene and warns Pat that if he continues to act out, he will be sent back to the mental hospital. Pat eventually calms down. The next morning, Pat goes for his usual jog and passes by Tiffany's house. To his surprise, he sees Tiffany out jogging as well. Tiffany is persistent in her advances toward Pat, trying to seduce him again. But this time Pat becomes angry and tells her that she is acting like a prostitute. His words deeply hurt Tiffany, and she leaves him. Pat then goes to see Dr. Cliff and tells him about his encounter with Tiffany. It turns out that Tiffany is also a patient of Dr. Cliff. Dr. Cliff advises Pat to try to be friends with Tiffany, as they both have similar problems and may be able to help each other with their mental illnesses. Pat agrees and decides to take Dr. Cliff's advice. The next day, Pat apologizes to Tiffany for his previous behavior and invites her to dinner. Tiffany forgives him and accepts the dinner invitation. That evening, they have dinner together and Pat orders cereal for dinner. They engage in a conversation, and Tiffany shares her struggles since her husband's death. She tells Pat that she had sex with a co-worker, which led to her getting fired. Tiffany also tells Pat that he shouldn't be discouraged, as she is dealing with similar problems. She even offers to send a message to Nikki on Pat's behalf. Pat is overjoyed at this, but his excitement gets the better of him and he says something insensitive, believing that his mental illness is different from Tiffany's, and that she is promiscuous. This offends Tiffany and she throws the food on the table and withdraws her offer to send the message. Tiffany storms out of the restaurant, but Pat chases after her, trying to apologize for his thoughtless comment. But Tiffany is still angry and starts yelling at him for harassing her. This attracts the attention of the people around them and they hold Pat, while Keogh arrives and arrests Pat, thinking he has caused a disturbance. When Tiffany sees Pat being taken away, she realizes that Pat's illness is starting to reemerge. She quickly comes to his defense, explaining that it was just a misunderstanding, and apologizes to Keogh, requesting that he release Pat. Tiffany then calms Pat down by instructing him to regulate his breathing by breathing slowly and regularly. To Pat's shock, Keogh approaches Tiffany and propositions her, but she ignores him and leaves. Pat then makes a comment about Tiffany's behavior and runs after her again to apologize for what he said before. This time, Tiffany forgives him and agrees to send his message to Nikki. The next morning, Pat goes to Tiffany's house to see her but is confronted by her parents. At the same time, a man arrives, looking for Tiffany. He is her co-worker and wants to ask her out. Pat realizes his intentions and tells him to respect Tiffany more and not to think of her as a promiscuous woman. Unbeknownst to Pat, Tiffany is listening to their conversation from inside the house. The next day, while Pat is out jogging, he runs into Tiffany. She tells him that if he wants her to send his message to Nikki, he must agree to be her dance partner. Tiffany is planning to participate in a dance competition and needs a partner. At first, Pat declines as he doesn't know how to dance, but Tiffany persists and tells him to consider her offer. She also suggests that participating in the competition would be a great way for Pat to show Nikki that he has changed for the better. Eventually, Pat agrees to be her dance partner and trains with her. Tiffany keeps her promise and sends the message to Nikki. As they train together, they start to get closer and develop feelings for each other. One day, while Pat and Tiffany were training, they are visited by Danny, who tells them that he is completely cured of his illness. As they practice dancing, Danny offers to teach them some new moves. He demonstrates a dance move with Tiffany, which causes Pat to feel jealous and he separates them. The next day, Pat asks Tiffany for a leave of absence, as he promised his father that he would attend a football game of his father's favorite team. His father had placed a big bet and believed that Pat would bring him luck. Tiffany agrees to leave as long as Pat promises to work hard to master the core movements of their dance before the competition. She also tells Pat that he has received a letter from Nikki, but she will only allow him to read it once they have finished training. Pat and Tiffany begin their training, but Pat is unable to focus as he keeps thinking about Nikki's response. Eventually, Tiffany allows Pat to read it. The letter states that Nikki appreciates Pat's efforts and encourages him. Upon reading the letter, Pat appears sad and Tiffany cautiously suggests that there may still be a chance for reconciliation between Pat and Nikki. The next day, Pat and his family go to the stadium to watch their favorite team play. Unfortunately, they get caught up in a fight between supporters, with some of them committing racism towards supporters from India, including Dr. Cliff. Pat initially tries to break up the fight, but when he sees his older brother, Jake, getting beaten, he can't hold back and joins the fight. Keogh and other police officers arrive to break up the fight and arrest Pat. When Pat and the others return home, his father scolds them for getting into a fight at the stadium. Patrizio's anger is further exacerbated by the fact that his favorite team lost the game. Soon after, Tiffany comes to visit Pat, but Patrizio blames Pat for spending too much time with her and claims that she brings him bad luck. Tiffany becomes angry and points out that Patrizio's favorite team has won more games when Pat and Tiffany are together, meaning that she is not unlucky for Pat. Her analysis renders Patrizio speechless. Unexpectedly, Patrizio is convinced by Tiffany's argument and invites his betting opponent, Randy, to bet on the next game. He even risks all of his money, including the capital for his restaurant. In response, Tiffany offers a parlay or a bet that combines multiple bets into one with a higher prize value. She suggests that if Patrizio's favorite team wins the game by a margin of at least 5 points and their dance performance in the competition scores at least 5 points, they will be declared the winners of the bet. Hearing this, Randy agrees and shakes Patrizio's hand as a sign of agreement. But Pat refuses because he is unsure if he and Tiffany will be able to achieve the points at stake. In the end, Tiffany lies to Pat and tells him that Nikki will be in attendance at the dance competition, which motivates Pat to prepare for it. Eventually, the day of the dance competition arrives. Pat and Tiffany are seen getting ready and surprisingly Nikki is in attendance. Nikki came there at the invitation of Ronnie and Veronica, who hope that Nikki will revoke Pat's restraining order after seeing his development during the competition. Knowing this, Tiffany's depression recurs and she goes to the bar to order a drink. Not long after, Pat goes looking for Tiffany as they are about to perform. He finds her half drunk at the bar and urges her to hurry as they are about to perform. At first, Tiffany refuses, but Pat continues to persuade her, and eventually, they appear on stage and perform the choreography they have been practicing. After all the contestants have finished their dances, the judges begin to evaluate the performances. Pat and Tiffany receive a score of 5 points, causing Pat's family to scream in excitement, as they have won the bet. This behavior confuses the judges and other participants, as Pat and Tiffany did not win the competition but are acting as if they had. At that moment, Pat meets Nikki and whispers something softly in her ear, leaving her unsure of what to say. This makes Tiffany feel jealous, so she leaves the event. After talking to Nikki, Patrizio informs Pat that Tiffany is gone, so Pat immediately goes after her. He gives her a letter, asking her to read it. In the letter, Pat confesses that he has learned that Tiffany had falsified a letter from Nikki. He states that he has been in love with Tiffany since they met and that although it took him some time to adjust to her behavior, he will not give up on being with her because she is the only one who can understand and accept his madness. Hearing this, Tiffany is moved and kisses Pat. The film ends by showing the growth and progress of Patrizio, who has been able to turn his love for gambling into a successful business venture, suggesting that he has learned to channel his passions in a more productive way. Danny's relationship with Pat's family has improved, indicating that they have been able to accept and understand him better. Pat and Tiffany's romantic relationship has blossomed, showing that they have been able to overcome their struggles and find love and happiness together. The moral that can be learned from this movie is that love can be found in unexpected places, and that it often arises from overcoming difficult challenges and struggles together. Love can grow not just in the mind but in the heart and togetherness. It's through these shared experiences and understanding of one another's hardships that strong connections are formed. It implies that true love is not something that can be forced or manufactured, but something that develops naturally when two people are able to connect on a deeper level.